Okay, we are live, everybody. Welcome to a rare Monday live stream. We don't usually do live streams on Monday, but we have a very special guest with us. Of course, we always have a very special leader of the Durand in Alexander Menker is coming from London. You may know him as the Oracle of London, and I'm going to pass it off to you, Alexander, very soon. But first, we have a very special guest coming to us from Moscow, or a little bit outside of Moscow, but from Moscow for all intents and purposes. We have Mr. Tim Kirby. And Tim, please introduce yourself. I have your links to your YouTube channel down below in the description box. And to everyone that's watching, I will have that channel as a pinned comment as well after the live stream. Tim.
Oh, hello, everybody. Guys, I just wanted, like I mentioned before we started this program, it's that sort of feeling of first-time caller, long-time listener. It's weird to be actually sort of on the program with you guys. I've watched you for so long. So thank you very much for having me. So the question is, who the heck am I? I've done political analysis for a long time, read about geopolitics for a long time. But as you pointed out before the stream started, I have sort of worked in the comedy field, which may start again in Russian. I did the morning zoo on the radio here for like 5 years till I completely burnt out from being paid a McDonald's salary. I play a little pro football in my old age as a reserve of the Moscow Spartans. So I also do that as in American football. I wrote for the Strategic Culture Foundation for a long time until I got the knock on the door, let's say. I'll be back though. One day.
Okay, very interesting. Well, we picked quite a day to do a live stream and to talk about what's going on in Russia. You are on the ground, Tim. Let's get into it, Alexander, real quick before I pass it off to you. Just a quick hello to everyone that's watching on Locals, thedurand.locals.com, on Rumble, on Odyssey, and on YouTube. And a quick hello to our amazing moderators, Valies. Valies is with us. Great to have you here, Valies. And Alan Watson. Alan, great to also have you here with us moderating. And I think those are our moderators. We will have a special show dedicated to the questions and the super chats as well. So I will be flashing the super chats on the bottom of the screen as we do the show. But me and Alexander will answer all questions in a dedicated video. Alexander, the floor is yours. Quite a day. Quite a day, Alexander.
An extraordinary day coming after an extraordinary couple of days. And I think, that you are, if I may say so, Tim, in the key decision-making center, because it's in Moscow that the big decisions, the decisions that are going to change not just the situation in Ukraine, but the situation in Russia, the situation in the world. That's where the decisions are being made. I understand that as we're making this program, Putin is meeting with his top advisors in the Russian Security Council, which is, by the way, not just a military body. It's a key political body. It covers every aspect of decision making. I suppose before we begin and get into the details, perhaps you could just tell us what you think the mood is like. Are people worried? Are they anxious? Are they afraid? Do they worry that things are going to get out of control? Are they angry with the Ukrainians? Are they angry with Putin? What is the mood in Moscow today?
Well, I can sum it up. I saw a tweet here on VK as I was waiting for you guys to show up. And it's from a man I don't know, Angelo Giuliano. So he's Italian, apparently. But it says Kiev today is getting a taste of what it has been doing over the last 8 years in the Donbass. And I think that's kind of the mood. That's the one mood is, unfortunately, although that doesn't meet up to our Christian ethics, a mood of a bit of a revenge or just desserts. It's also the sort of mood of finally. Because as you guys know, to a very large extent, the military and a lot of people in the military feel that their hands were tied by some of the restrictions in the special military operation. And as you guys are very astute in your knowledge of the way that politics actually works, well, 90% of the population isn't. So a lot of the people around Russia, the average person, are just kind of wondering, why are we doing things this way? I guess the boss knows best what's going on. And this is probably a very good show to the Russian population that Russia sort of means business. I think in some ways it might even be more of an internal signal rather than external in a way. But just the one key point I wanted to bring up as we get this going is that, a lot of the things that have happened over the course of the special military operation, if we look at them from both sides, okay? Well, the Russian media writes one thing. For example, Bucha. The Russian media goes, due to the timeline, the Ukrainians did it. And the Ukrainian and the Western media says, due to the timeline, the Russians did it. And there's been a lot of things like that, accusing both sides of using schools as some sort of form of human shield, so on and so forth, right? Well, this time, the mainstream media made the mistake. They put their chips down and said, this is great. The Ukrainians did this. What an accomplishment. This act of terrorism against civilian infrastructure is amazing. And I think in a lot of ways, that's sort of just now really, again, sort of untied the hands of Russia's legal, logical framework approach that they've been using, which is probably good for the future of the country going down the road, and especially in terms of working with partners, because you mentioned that decision-making is happening in the Kremlin. But I think that in Samarkand, a lot of decisions were actually made. And I think it's very important for the Kremlin to also send the signal of this whole multipolar world thing. It's not an excuse to have a Russia-dominated world. We actually mean this, So I think they're very concerned with following these rules and conditions and definitions of what wars and operations are according to the UN, so on and so forth, in order to have good relations later down the road. I'm a bit more short-sighted, but that's me.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that people, and you mentioned that people in Russia don't always understand the politics of decisions and the complexity sometimes of making decisions. But we've discussed many times on the Iran, the restraints, the constraints on Russian actions placed upon the Russians by the need to keep their foreign partners on side, that they couldn't just come in and do all of these things that they're doing today right at the start, because it would have been difficult to justify this with India, with Saudi Arabia, with Turkey, with China even. And of course, this restraint has earned dividends. I mean, it's worked. I mean, the fact that the Saudis, for example, are prepared to cut oil production by 2 million barrels a day might not have been the case if, a couple of months ago, the Russians had acted differently. It might not have worked. I mean, there's a huge amount of criticism, I remember, in Russia of Putin, because he accepted Saudi mediation over the release of some of the Azov-style prisoners. And a lot of people were very angry. They say, why are we letting these people go? And of course, again, maybe it's disappointing that these people, from a Russian point of view, are being released. But if you're going to get the Saudis to cut oil production by 2 million barrels a day, that is more useful to you. So I completely agree about that. I am entirely of the same view. And just to also add, I'm also of the same view that the Crimean Bridge incident, I think there must be a lot of regrets now that they rushed to applaud it without waiting to see what the consequences would be, because given that Ukraine has essentially effectively claimed credit for it, given that it's been given that credit by the West, it's very, very difficult to row that back if anybody in the West is thinking of doing so. So those things. So where do we go from here? I mean, you say that the Russians now feel that the gloves are coming off, that the military finally can throw off its constraints. We have apparently a very aggressive military chief appointed to run things on the ground. Do you expect a big increase in the tempo of the military offensive?
Well, that's something that you might have to ask a real military expert about. But one thing that you guys have talked about, that I've talked about, in fact, I have a video coming out about it today or tomorrow, probably when I upload it. Tim Kirby, Russia Hardcore on Telegram. I really find it. It's going to be related to that. I think that a sort of large flanking action is going to happen because over time, basically, the Ukrainians have already gone through 7, 8 rounds of mobilization. And although I don't think that they're actually going to do it, technically now they can draft women, and I believe technically now they can draft the elderly. So they're very, at least from a legal standpoint, getting pretty desperate here. And as they keep launching offensive after offensive after offensive to win some sort of optics or within Europe to get more financing and whatnot, eventually I think they're going to reach the point where they're not going to have enough manpower to really actually guard, especially the entire rear line. Because if you look at a map of what's today's remnants of Ukraine, you have a very long border, about 1,000 kilometers from the very southwestern tip of Belarus all the way to then that would be the Lugansk region. That's now part of Russia. And they're not going to be able to defend that. I don't even know if they can really defend it right now, but obviously Russia's not in the mood to lose a lot of troops or fight this like it's the desperate battle of Stalingrad. So I think in some ways they're actually still going to be waiting until they get that nice, perfect moment where Kiev has moved too much to the front line to actually be able to provide really any defense or anything behind it. Or with this new deal with Belarus, that Belarus might actually be entering the conflict, they might actually try to draw from the front line enough men to defend against such flank. But either way, in either scenario, Kiev loses because they either spread their forces too thin in one direction or they spread them too thin in two directions. And I think that Russia's going to, in some ways, sort of be kind of like just trying to go around them, if that makes any sense. Because for the entirety of this war, they've really outmaneuvered the Ukrainians.
I mean, what you say makes complete sense. And by the way, you may be interested to know that I get the sense that people in the British Ministry of Defence are seeing things a little bit like you do, because, of course, the British Ministry of Defence publishes regular daily bulletins about what's going on. And today's bulletin is about the fact that the Russians have been pushing on with their offensive against Bakhmut, even as all of these events everywhere else, in Kherson region, they've been, the Ukrainians have tried things there. In Kharkiv, they tried things there. The Russians have remained utterly focused, at least, when I say the Russians, I mean the pro-Russians. They've been utterly focused on hammering away at Bakhmut. And we're suddenly getting the sense that that's now paying dividends, that this key center, this place that had become very heavily fortified, apparently, by the Ukrainians, that's now on the brink of falling. And the British Ministry of Defence acknowledges that. They're saying, that there's something very strange about the fact that the Russians didn't divert their forces away from this battle of Bakhmut, that they still focused on it. So that, it seems to me, plays very closely to what you're saying. What about this new General Surovikin, who I'll be straight and honest and say I've never heard of before the fighting a few weeks ago? He was involved in the fighting in Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. I've never heard of this man before, but I've never been interested in military matters. What do people say about him in Moscow?
This is one moment where I want us to sort of actually think about us as people who talk about politics, kind of for a living, sometimes not for a living, sometimes for donations and survival, who do talk about this. The experts in the West, not one of them said this was going to happen.
No.
Again, so this is very important that no one knows who this guy is. And this is very much a Russian tradition. I guess there's maybe some sort of cursed tendency where if you really pick out your next successor, that's I don't know, bad for political stability. So generally there's a lot of surprises. Like when Mishustin became the prime minister, the only person who even really knew who he was to comment was Margarita Simonyan, the head of Russia Today. She was sort of the one who knew. The rest of the country was completely in the dark. So this is kind of the same thing. The other funny part is that his name actually means like stern or brutal. His last name, the root word that forms it. So in some ways, he has some good marketing behind him. It's kind of like Stalin. He has a very appropriate name for what his position is. But he did have the background. The one thing we do know about him is he's considered to be the one who's responsible for the successes that Russia was able to achieve in Syria, especially in terms of interacting with Assad and his Syrian Arab army. Because as you remember, Russia didn't fight that war themselves. The deal of modern Russia is you called us in for assistance, we'll assist you and help you organize this, but your wars are your wars. The Cold War is over and we're not going to go in and fight for anyone anymore. So he's essentially the coordinator of that. And so people have high hopes because if he could defeat ISIS and all these other machinations in a completely different universe, hopefully he can do something amazing in Russia's own territory that it considers to be its own that was stolen from it. You see?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what about Russian commentaries about General Surovikin? Is it welcomed, the fact that they have a new commander, an actual commander on the ground? By the way, just on that subject, one of the most baffling things for me, one of the most strange things for me, is that it does seem as if Western intelligence agencies have been very ignorant about the Russian military structure in Ukraine, because they were claiming months ago that a man called General Dvornikov had been appointed to the very role that General Surovikin has been appointed to, and I assume that was true. And it turned out that it wasn't. We've now discovered that General Dvornikov has never had that kind of role. So it seems that they don't actually know very much about how military things happen in Russia itself. But I mean, do people in Russia, are they pleased that there's been this appointment, that finally there's one person in charge on the battlefields, even if they don't know very much about him?
Well, the overall feeling seems to be that, again, it goes back to this feeling of finally, as in it's part of this being like, okay, well, finally we have our field marshal here who's going to coordinate all these things. Because from what I understand, it's actually been sort of a process of kind of like the Security Council sort of put together their vision for the special military operation and sort of passed it down then to the military to execute, and so on and so forth. And as we all know, when George Bush Jr. said something like, this would be a lot easier if I was a dictator. And fighting a war is essentially, it's a lot easier when you have a field marshal overseeing the whole thing and making those decisions. So it'll certainly enable a more monolithic approach or quicker approach. But again, the guy has a good track record, but we also have to remember that because Russia doesn't fight wars of luxury, there aren't a huge amount of Russian generals with a lot of experience. I mean, I guess maybe some of the guys who went back to the Soviet Afghanistan war, but we have to remember that that was a loss and that war was fought terribly. So maybe actually their options of who they could have picked were very limited.
Yeah. What about the mood about the mobilization? Because we've been hearing a huge amount in the West about how it's chaotic, disorganized, unpopular, how it caused many people in Russia to get very angry. I mean, what is the mood about it in Russia?
Well, I'm going to have to say that this is, I'm going to have to go to sort of like almost Orwellian mode. Like, imagine that on the one side we have that everything the Western media said is absolutely true. It's a complete nightmare. It's a failure. People are terrified, and the whole country's falling apart because of it. And on the Russian side, there's 70,000 volunteers, and everything went really calmly, and it's happening. I think both are true. That's why I say it's Orwellian. Because looking around, have there been major firings in connection with the mobilization? Yes. A lot of this has been done terribly. A lot of people who are absolutely, completely unqualified to be mobilized have gotten mobilization letters. I do believe, again, we're going to mention Margarita Simonyan. She shared, I believe it was something like a 55-year-old surgeon who never served in the military, got his notice. And so there have been a bunch of firings. There have definitely been some debacles. Has there been an exodus of people in the thousands? We can't, so some people have said millions. That's stupid. But in the thousands, an exodus of people leaving the country. Yes, that is true. That those images from the Georgian border are true. The problem is the mainstream media kind of shows the same images every day, pretending the people are new. So that's on the one hand true. But again, there's plenty of volunteers. There's also a lot of videos of people, like it's World War II, singing songs to the guys as they go off to the front, and life goes on as normal in Russia. I do think there's one problem though. One of the key problems is with this mobilization, that is an emotional thing. And as both of you guys know, Russia is not good at the feels. Kiev, about the optics and the feels and the manipulation and the PR, and I mean the West being Kiev, right? They're a lot better at that sort of stuff. And I don't think that Russia did a very good job of explaining with this whole mobilization thing. They just kind of threw it out there in a very rational, front of the mind sort of way. And to this day, a lot of people that I work with actually are convinced that some guy is going to come and just drag them out of their house. And I'm like, so I actually know people who've bailed because of this, but they're not. I also remember about not leaving the country. My number's in there somewhere in the draft order. It's in there somewhere. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, if they do draft me, that means the apocalypse is happening because I'm 40. I have bad knees and I've never served in the army. But we'll see. So unfortunately, this mobilization thing, I can't give you this either confirm or deny because it's kind of both. Have there been mass protests against it? No. We were recently filming in Khabarovsk, and they actually had the sort of central, I don't know what you want to call it, square was reserved for a protest. And the ironic part is maybe we got there really early or something, but we wanted to film that square because it's kind of iconic. And it only had like 12 police officers and it was completely empty.
Yeah.
So they kind of had prepared for this protest and no one showed up.
Yeah.
So again, there are no mass protests in Russia and an exodus of people. Yes. Mass exodus. No. But guys, from someone who's going to spend the rest of their life in Russia, especially, it's not going to be easy for me to go back to America anytime soon if I want to be free and not in a prison cell. Things are actually pretty good here and pretty stable. I mean, there really are no mass protests of anything to speak of. So, and also with all these people leaving, Russian society needed a shakeup. I can't express to you how Westerners use the word corrupt. I wouldn't say corrupt, but how many fifth column like traitors there are in the Russian media. I've worked in the Russian media for a long time, and I've been on every TV channel in Russia or done things for every media organization. So I'm literally talking about the whole thing, not one particular organization. But there are so many people who despise this country who are working in major media. I would even say that especially in key positions, they're the absolute majority. So the more of them that run away, the better. First off, it'll open career opportunities for yours truly. We mentioned comedy earlier. I actually have a pilot of a show that's comedy related where I was sort of approved to be the host. And I can't say what network it's from, but hopefully it'll be approved soon. But long story short, why me? Foreign guy, got an accent. Why me again going into comedy as a host of a TV show? Because the other hosts are afraid. People who are known for being like comedy show hosts, they're afraid to be noticed making jokes during a time of war. During the time of war when the Donbass people were being murdered for 8 years. Ha ha, ho ho, hee hee, fun times. Now they're afraid because Big Papa West might see them. You see what I mean? So it's opening fantastic career opportunities for yours truly. But there are a lot of problems within Russia, and I never want to make it seem like everyone in Russia stands for great Putin, great flag, and for great victory and Eurasian ideas and multipolarity. That is not the case. Moscow, although this is the decision-making center, this is also a cesspool of liberals and traitors. So that's the one thing. You're in some ways here. You're in the belly of the beast, one way or depending on how you look at it. Just depends which beast you're mentioning.
I have to say, I'm very impressed that people who were botched the mobilization were sacked here in Britain. And in Europe, even more. Anybody who botches anything doesn't get sacked; they get promoted to an even more important and responsible post. I'm saying that with bitter tears in my eyes, but it's true.
Well, I think that's actually you make a good point. That's actually a very positive step for Russia. That remember when we have not like 1990s Russia was it was a nightmare. I mean, everything was inefficient, everything was being stolen. And now it seems if you don't do your job, you're fired, or if you do it completely horribly. And I think that that's definitely it is a good sign that there's a step in the right direction and that they take the military seriously. But it also shows kind of a lack of preparation that they really weren't prepared, or the people who were set up to do this really weren't quite ready or anything. So, yeah, I don't quite know what to say. But like I said, my number's in there somewhere, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But so far, I think things have been pretty calm.
What about Putin's position? I mean, has there been any criticism of him? I'm not talking about criticism from the liberals and people who are pro-Western and people who I've seen the opinion polls. People like Levada, Sion. You get the sense that you're talking about a group that, in an opinion poll, there'll be around 10%, which isn't to say that 10% of the population, but there is a grouping that is there. But what about everyone else? About the great mass of people? They've been seeing this war drag on. They've had a difficult month of Ukrainian counteroffensives. I presume they're well informed about this. What have there been any murmurings and murmurings about Putin himself? Or
Oh,
is it all,
well,
yeah.
before we get to the masses, Ramzan Kadyrov actually wrote a very long, extensive post where he sort of broke down what he felt were the problems. And he stated, he's like, we're going to win this war. We're destined to win this war. I'm on your side. But it was a sort of a, with all due respect, sir, kind of message. Like, it's sort of public, like, with all due respect, we're doing this the wrong way. And the guy from the Wagner group, Prigozhin, he also had a similar sort of message. Which how should we look at this? I would actually see it as a good thing, because some people are like, that's bad. They're not supporting Putin and the movement. They're not potential traitors. That's when you're getting into that Washington thing. Whereas if you don't agree, you're a bad person. I actually think that the ability to, with all due respect, criticize the leader and the policies openly and discuss it is actually a good thing for Russia. It's very much like how America kind of used to be. So pretty good. Now about the population is kind of thinking the same thing of, they understand that, well, they want more blood. You know what I mean? We have to be honest. So you mentioned about how how they have the captured Azov fighters. They returned a lot of them, healthy and happy and all that. And trust me, from the masses, they were not happy about that. They want blood and they want revenge. But that's a part of history. I mean, remember the founding fathers of the United States were always very scared of the mob. Well, every culture can kind of have the mob. And so, yeah, people definitely want more decisive results. Or, you get into, remember, you guys don't, maybe, well, no, we're at the same age. You probably remember some of the propaganda behind like the Iraq War. Well, I mean, I remember in America seeing bumper stickers of, why don't we just nuke Iraq? Let's nuke them Iraqis, just take them out. And I wouldn't say that Russians have gotten to that extent, because they see the Ukrainians as being, first off, either their own people swimming among Ukrainians, or the more popular opinion that Ukrainians are just duped Russians. But they're kind of like, let's just get this over with and just blow up their infrastructure. Like, let's just knock this out and get her done and get everybody home and take that territory back. One thing I can tell you about public opinion here is that everyone is absolutely sure that, more or less, excluding the western part of Ukraine, which should have never been a part of the Soviet Union because it's so anti-Russian, the sort of Galicia, Carpathian zone, everyone is sure that that's an inherent part of Russia and should come back to Russia, and that the people there, like I said, are either actual Russians or duped Russians.
What about the economic situation? Because, I mean, I was reading again in The Guardian just yesterday that, in fact, behind the facade, the economy is basically falling apart. This is a narrative that you constantly hear. Do you feel yourself in a country where the economy is falling apart? I mean, are things looking strained in the shops? Are people losing their jobs? What's the situation like in the economy?
Well, first off, let me start with a little bit of a personal anecdote. The real stress that I feel is over food, because I've got kids, right? And I do it pretty decently. I would put myself in sort of the middle class, or maybe on a good month, the upper middle class of Russia. And the food crunch is on. Now, this doesn't quite make sense because Russia is a massive food exporter. When I've traveled around the country, and I was just on the Chinese border, where you're seeing fields of soy to the horizon, right? There are huge farms all over the country. We produce a lot of food here. And yet it just keeps getting more and more expensive. Maybe it sort of stopped for the moment, but the food crunch is on. But overall, I don't know people who are losing their jobs over this. COVID was maybe a little bit tough on people, but the same factories are making the same stuff. Some major international businesses have closed, but in a lot of ways, everything has been masked. McDonald's became that Vkusny Tochka, and it's the same thing. The factories that made all the furniture for IKEA changed their name and still make the same furniture or something similar. So I don't really see. And again, someone listening to this would say, of course you're biased. The only thing I can say that's really bad is this food thing, guys, because food is expensive here now. Gasoline is not. The internet is not. The telephone is not. Electricity certainly isn't. Why not just in Russia? Why not just enjoy it? A European should come here just to turn on every light in a building and just dance around and enjoy the lighting, because it costs like nothing. Especially out east, where they have a lot more hydroelectric power. It costs, from an American standpoint, almost literally nothing. So there are definitely some things that are still cheap in Russia, but these food prices, when you've got kids, man, and kids that are growing, it is kind of tough. The costs, I would say, at restaurants from pre-war to now, I would say have doubled. But my cell phone bill is exactly the same. Electricity bill is exactly the same, and it's like nothing, So
that's interesting. What is the trend of prices? Is it up or down? Food prices specifically.
Well, yeah, food prices are up, man. Food prices, I think the cost of everything roughly went up 30% from the start of the war. And even before that, again, it's one of these mystery things where perhaps because I've watched a lot of your programs, Alexander, and you have a definite feel for economics that perhaps I don't. Maybe you could perhaps take a theoretical stab at it as to why Russia is a major food exporter, and yet food here continuously gets more expensive, even in terms of inflation during the entire 15 years that I've been in Russia. It just keeps going up and up and up, and we don't know why. But on the other hand, one thing that's weird that I've talked to people about is for the first time ever, okay, this is not just like, well, it's rare. 0.1%, so 1/10 of 1% mortgage rates. Because as of before the special military operation began, you could not take out a mortgage for over 15 years because no one knew the future. The interest rates were going to be like, I don't know, from somewhere like 6 to 7 to 10%, and no one could afford that. No one was going to do it, and they wouldn't give it. And now it's like going back to America, and I think like the 80s where or maybe 90s, where they're giving out 1/10 of 1%, and you're going to have a 30-year mortgage where. So that's a major shift. Someone was trying to explain to me who's better with economics that they're somehow trying to kind of keep building, keep construction going. So they're giving these nice offers. I don't know about that, but very interesting. That is something economic that has completely shifted. And overall, all real estate got way more expensive. First, because
before
of
you
COVID,
take a stab.
Yeah.
Sorry. Before you take a stab, Alexander, at the food prices, I just want to ask Tim. Is the increase in food prices, is that something you've seen during the 7 months of the SMO, or was this a trend that preceded the conflict?
Like imagine you're driving a car and you're kind of going, first gear, second gear, and then you throw it in the third gear when you're feeling good. It was kind of like a steady and then whoop, like that, taking off kind of. If we could imagine a parabola in our minds. So yeah. So definitely, I mean, talk to anyone else you happen to know in Russia, and to tell them what was it like to go. What did it cost to go out to dinner, maybe a year or two ago versus now? I would say double. I would say the price of eggs, I can say for sure, has gone up definitely by 30% as of most major sort of household product. But then again, remember, I'm comparing this to Russian salaries, which always seem bad. Maybe when you look at things in terms of the U.S. dollar, you're like, okay, a kilogram of sugar now costs like what, $1.15, whoop-de-doo. But in dollars, Russian salaries aren't so great, so it's kind of hard to compare.
I'm fairly sure, by the way, that the reason why food prices in Russia have been rising is because global food prices are rising. And one must always understand that if you're a major food exporter, then inevitably that starts to affect your prices at home, because obviously if prices at home don't rise, then, and you try and cap them, then what happens is it becomes even more attractive to export. And that can actually lead to food shortages. Now, the government has much tighter control of exports of energy products, oil and gas, because the energy exporters, Gazprom and Rosneft, the big ones, are state-owned. But they don't have the same level of control, I suspect, over food exporters. And I get to add another factor, which I'm sure is playing a role, which is that I'm sure that back in the start of last year, when the sanctions were imposed, there would probably been a huge rush of people going to the shops. That would have pushed prices up. That will have created some shortages, inevitably. Maybe not visible shortages, but shortages further up the supply chain. And that would also have caused prices to rise. Now, that factor will probably work its way through the system before very long. So that, you might even start to see, not now perhaps, but around the spring, you might start to see some food prices begin to fall, especially as the harvest this year has been good. But the overall problem, the global rise in food prices, is going to be a problem wherever you are. And it's obviously difficult in Russia. It's very difficult for people here. Do you have things like soup kitchens and things like that? Because we certainly do.
In theory, yes, but I'm not that familiar with how that all works.
Yeah.
I can tell you though, first off, no one's starving. I don't see starving people anywhere. I just think that most people's salary goes to dinner, kind of thing, kind of paycheck to paycheck sort of living. Then again, if you consider there's paycheck to paycheck living, then how is Russia that different from the United States? So if you want to look at it that way, one thing I can tell you is you guys probably don't know, because it really wasn't an international issue. I believe near the start of the special military operation, or maybe a bit before, Putin actually gave a speech where he threatened most major food producers about these prices. And as you guys know, generally there's a sort of policy or technique or methodology that Putin has where it's like warning, 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 louder warning, warning, and then he does something. And I think that eventually he's starting to get to the point where now the warnings are louder. Point out is that previously certain groups like the ever so fun National Liberation Movement within Russia, which are, boy, give an interview for those guys. You'll have a great time. They always accused foreign control over these Russian grocery store chains that hike up the price. And it is a fact that the grocery store chains really do gouge the prices. Like they don't see themselves as a public service. They see themselves as a money-making, industry. I've heard from countless people that there's a lot of trickery and especially bribery over with like shelf spacing. So, for example, at a prime grocery store, you want to get your juice on there. You might have to pay someone under the table X amount of money to make sure that your juice gets on the shelf and someone else's juice gets shoved into the garbage dumpster. So I don't know if that's still the case, but some insiders sort of leaked me the information of how it's determined what's on your grocery store shelves in Russia, and it's extremely corrupt, unfortunately.
I'm sure that's right. Can I just ask, are there any other political forces now which are actually capitalizing on these events? I mean, what's happening? I mean, we always hear about Putin. Putin isn't the entirety of the political system in Russia. Are people talking about any particular other person who, might be the person to take charge, to lead, are the political parties rising, anything like that, anything like this? What has been, for me, in some ways, a frustratingly static political system.
Well, although maybe officially no one said that Putin is the center of everything. He's not Prophet Putin. But on the other hand, when you really look at it, people's sort of policies generally boil down to being either pro or anti-Putin in some way or another, pro system or against the system. So, is there some sort of new driving force within Russia? No. But again, it goes back to the concept of sort of Russian politics, where in the West, you sort of have this, in theory, of sort of back and forth between, right, left, liberal, conservative, and as time sort of goes on. Whereas in Russia, you sort of have more of a symbiosis of factors. And that's in a lot of ways why the whole idea of this state Duma and like having a parliament, it's just stupid. It doesn't make any sense for Russia because the overwhelming majority of people agree on everything. If you really take a look at the Russian parties, the political parties, and what their sort of official positions are, they're all essentially the same. Like Just Russia is a little bit more about give people money for social programs. The communists are a little bit that way. The LDPR is a little bit more, let's be nationalistic and be maybe a little bit more lenient about gun rights. But overall, I mean, they're just kind of, you're kind of comparing Coke, Pepsi, and RC, Cola together, ultimately. So, is there something radically different or some sort of great opposing ideas of our time? Not particularly. I would say the overall majority of people are sort of on this one big vector. So,
what's the mood about the West? I mean, presumably they're aware that the West is backing Ukraine and all of that. I mean, are people angry with the West? Do they see the West as an enemy now? Is there apprehensions that the West might intervene in Ukraine? Do people talk about that?
Hollywood is the best thing that has ever happened to the United States. Mm-hmm. Hollywood has enabled the United States to maintain a foreign policy that everyone hates, and yet everyone across the earth, no doubt, from the upper halls of power to the simplest street pauper, loves America. That's my answer. Because no matter what, Russians have a few cultural quirks. One cultural quirk that I probably shouldn't mention, because if our buddies in Washington are listening, they can definitely use this to destroy Russia. But Russians are sort of obsessed to this day because of Peter the Great, Peter the Not Great. He's not called the Great in Russian, by the way. He's called Peter the First. Important to note. He's not great here. Well, because of Peter the First and his policies of Westernization and having the Tsar, someone who's sort of like halfway to being a god on earth, comes back to the populace and tells all these people that that they're inferior to the West. And that's where it sort of started. And Russians have a massive, all-encompassing, titanic inferiority complex to the West to this day. Maybe what's happening in Ukraine is perhaps, I'm saying perhaps, I'm not guaranteeing you, perhaps what Peter the First, I should speak Russian, what Peter the First did back here and what's happening right now, perhaps these are equal in mass. And finally, the pendulum is going to swing back away from that, but I'm not sure. Because you have to remember, when I came to Russia, every last single person was absolutely and 100% sure that the West was 100% completely superior to them in every possible way. Their choice was, do I accept this and become a bootlick and try to go to the West? Or do I just accept that I like my country, even though it's inferior, and I'll just live as a second-class citizen? Probably the similar mentality to how slaves had to deal with their status in the South in the olden days. Probably something of a similar psychological status. Now it's kind of changing. America mania is a bit over. But and also after all this, the LGBT stuff, the mass migration, the impoverishment of Europe, it's starting to kind of click for like the first time, like, oh, maybe we're not so inherently inferior, maybe. But guys, when you are a foreign person, okay, so I've had the chance, for good or bad, to meet thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Russia. Due to my career, I have to meet people all the time, or whether it be in the store or whatnot. And generally, when you meet someone, even to this very day, they're stunned. Why would you come to this awful country? Everything's richer. In America, there's so much more money. Why would you live here? It's one of the hardest parts about living in Russia. In fact, I wrote a 150-page book about why I moved to Russia, just as a sort of answer to this person. But they're still omnipresent and they're everywhere. So the real means of manipulating Russia, the real mechanism, if you want to destroy Russia, their inferiority complex. It is their grandest Achilles heel. And I think that on some level, not on like a total level, but on some level, the fact that Putin continues to take this a very legalistic approach, giving Kiev time to change their mind, or or the West to maybe change course, I think there's a little bit of that too, where he's like, but they're the West. I mean, they're the best. The West is great. They're the, and I think that somehow they still in the halls of power believe in the West. Whereas you guys know, I don't know your opinions, but I think we all know the dark side of the West a lot more intimately.
We also know the incompetence of many of the leaders of the West, if I may say. Can I just say, I not only agree with that, but I think that's the fundamental difference between China and Russia. The Chinese are incredibly self-confident and have been forever, for as long as I've known. The Russians are not. And that's been the biggest single factor that's held them back, in my opinion. I mean, I was actually reading recently how very, very difficult it was how difficult it was to get Russian companies to use Russian chips, even though they were pretty chips comparable to Western ones, And
Oh yeah, try to get a Russian to drive a Russian car or buy anything. Again, that is changing a little bit because now you want power tools. Guess where they're coming from? But still, yeah, that everything from Europe is better. Oh man, yeah, that's boy, does that get old living here. Sorry to be so whiny, but guys, I can't. I'm trying to just want to express to you guys in the audience, to the extent that it's like being in a smoke-filled room. You can't not smell it. It's that thick, you know.
If, or perhaps one should say when, this ends in victory, this whole Ukraine thing ends in victory, will that be a factor that will make them more self-confident? Because in effect, they'll have taken on the West and they'll have won.
Well, I've kind of made this joke before about Russia. Can we win a war? Yeah. Can we win at hockey? Yeah. Can I start a small business? It's impossible to do that. And that's really the Russian mentality. And I don't know. I think Russians have accepted that there's a few things that they're allowed to be good at, and one of them is war. But otherwise, I'm not sure. I have a lot of hope for the younger generation because I can see because I have children who are, like middle school age. They're different. The real self-loathing Russians are people of our generation. The most hardcore or older. And the younger people have kind of grown up in a Putin world, and they don't really see that world as being particularly different in terms of like technological or wealth level or anything else. So I have a little bit of hope in young people that they're different. But the one thing is, again, as I've talked about very often on my channel, look for Tim Kirby Hardcore or Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore on Telegram. You can find me there. All my videos got Rumble, BitChute, and YouTube until they ban me. But the thing that is about this sort of self-hatred thing is, remember, Russia has never made a real successful movie. And I bring this up a lot because remember about narratives and ideas and feelings and all that. I mean, there are some movies that they all suck. None of them are good enough. And until Russia can really start weaving its own narrative and really start to actually have its own ideas, Russian children pretty much grow up with the Disney, heavily censored, by the way, Disney, Hollywood sort of universe that we claim in Russia to hate. We don't we have a Russian equivalent of YouTube and Facebook and all that. But do we have like the Russian government going in like Zuckerberg and all these guys? And we'll put it this way, certain types of content get pushed down. Certain types of rainbow content get pushed up. Do we do the opposite in Russia? No.
Well, let me just push back a little bit.
Okay. Go for it.
Just a little bit. I know Alexander is going to probably weigh in because Alexander, you're actually
a film buff,
someone who knows a lot about Russian film and cinema. How would you explain the success of Russian literature? I disagree. I think Russian cinema is actually very.
But is it on the level of Star Wars?
No, no country.
The original three Star Wars movies were like American foreign policy, the advertisement. We're the white hat good guys.
I agree. I agree, Tim. I completely agree with you. But in all fairness, I don't think any country has been able to produce something like Star Wars. Even China, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen anyone produce that level.
Maybe certain anime. Trust me, I think there's an entire generation of people who've been brought up on Dragon Ball. Or
you're starting to see some of this in the cinema coming out of, for example, Japan or South Korea, for example. I think South Korea is actually now putting together a lot of cinema that is really making its way to the West and having a lot of success. But how do you explain that? I don't know, Alexander, if you agree with what I'm saying, but I would say that even Russian entrepreneurs, Telegram is successful. Yandex,
but Durov is a liberal.
There is a lot of Russian innovation. I would say maybe not at the level. There
is some, but you have to understand
very few
that
countries
sort of
are at the level of the U.S. with regards to this stuff.
See, I see that, and you see that. But when you talk to the average Russian, VK is just a copy of Facebook. Or like I just said, Durov, the guy who made Facebook and Telegram, he's a liberal. He hates this country. I think he's just stuck here. He understands. He's one of the few liberals that understands who feeds him.
Yeah, but he's still Russian. And I imagine Russian educated, and you know, his
let me tell you a
contribution
little
is hard
story.
to ignore. I mean,
Let me tell you a
he's
perfect
made an
story about
impact.
this. I used to be part of a tech startup in Thailand that was organized by Russians. Okay, and these Russians made huge money, like multiple Lamborghini penthouse money in the video game industry in Russia. And what did they do after the tech startup part that I was involved in? It failed. I had to move on to better pastures called RT. Now they went on to later move their whole business over to the Baltic states. Guess what? The war starts. They're cut off from Mother Russia. And now I saw one of them with these people who are, I'm talking Dubai, Lamborghini, like Fast and the Furious lifestyle money, asking for a job, a normal job. Like a normal job in the sense of being like a vice CEO or something like that. Why? Because they were sure that the real money, these millions and millions of dollars that we got from the Russians, from these people, that's not good enough. We have to go to Europe in order to be truly successful, and that money's good money from good people. That's, I think, the perfect example of that mentality. And now they're paying for it because they lost it all. Everything.
I'm going to just throw in my own piece, which is firstly on entrepreneurial things. I think there are lots of very, very good Russian entrepreneurs, actually. And I mean, I've met them, I've dealt with them, I've seen what they can do. Again, I accept the perception isn't there. And one of the things is that they tend to be very focused on Russia itself. They don't really have an export idea. So we were starting to get things. But I mean, you know, the other thing is when it comes to film, culture, Russians are very good at high culture. You know, if you want to do high culture films, they can do that. No one.
Guys, remember,
and I agree with that.
I know we don't have super amounts of time left. I just want to make an important point that regardless of who you are, whether you're from the super ultra elite down to the bottom, you've probably watched some movies. I mean, like the Prince William and Harry to Hunter Biden. We've all been sort of raised up on something. The Russians, that they do make some interesting pieces of media. That's not what the elite gets. There is no like counter argument coming from Russia that's sinking into the minds of the elite people of like, you know what? There really are two genders, and this is good. Men and women sort of fit together and complement each other. It's awesome. Or messages about how, the real purpose of relationships is to build a symbiosis for the creation of children, not so much about just the physical stuff, in contrast to Disney. So in a lot of ways, maybe Russia does do some nice stuff, but it doesn't win the global ideological war.
No, I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, the point I was going to make is if you're talking about top, big art cinema, the Russians are outstanding. You're talking about Star Wars and things like that, which has its place, absolutely does. Yeah. Only the United States does that. No one else. And that has been not something I say that's critical of the United States. It's their great achievement. That is something that the US does, and no one else comes close. Alex, I've spoken a lot. Do you want to put a few points to Tim now?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, Tim, regarding how do you God, my mind's drawing a blank. How do you live in Russia at this moment in time?
Oh, well, when I arrived, I just sort of came here on my own.
No, so someone that wants to migrate, someone that wants to migrate to Russia, is it possible now, or is there a process?
Well, I'm actually trying to start this project has already started in the Great White. There's two locations, in the north and in the south. In the north, under the oversight of a man who's named Father Joseph Gleason, Russia's only Eastern Orthodox priest born in America. We're creating a project called the American Villages to help people immigrate to Russia. The problem is we kind of started this as a special military operation was getting underway. So it's been very difficult. In general, it is extremely, extremely difficult to move to Russia, to do it legally. And that's why I wanted to do this project, because remember about Russians' pessimism and all that. Russians themselves just believe that anyone can just come here whenever they want because, who cares? No one cares. But that is not the case at all. It is extremely difficult to live here. It's a very closed off society in a legal sense. And so I'm trying to put together this project so we can create this village. My village would be in the south of Moscow, near where I live. and actually have little plots of land where people can come and get some legal assistance to get around the immigration quotas. Basically, the main problem is that you have to somehow get a spot in the immigration quota. Each state every year has a certain number of people that can immigrate. That number is teeny tiny, minuscule, and you're never going to get in. Really, the only way to move here is to be married to a Russian citizen, which allows you to be in the quota. So it gives you a quota spot no matter what, okay, which is cool, but it only gives you the opportunity to apply to live here. It gives you nothing but the opportunity, which is a very important difference from, say, citizenship. And then you have to do a temporary residency, a permanent residency, and citizenship. I'm a big, as you guys have noticed, my career is being a Russia advocate, but I do not ever want to portray the idea that moving to Russia is easy. You have to go 100% hardcore, balls to the wall, or don't even try.
Okay, and a final question, Tim. Traveling to Russia right now, there's no Visa, MasterCard payment systems online. It's also been cut off. How does someone visit Russia? How do they pay for stuff? How do they buy something at a restaurant or at a cafe? And I know the Mir card is something that operates, but the Mir card is something that most people, that all the people in the West can't really get. I mean, it's not something you can go to your bank and you can get a Mir card. So, are there people traveling to Russia? Mainly from the West, and if there are people in Russia from the West, how are they getting by? Are they just using cash, or is there something that we don't know?
We've got a few levels to this here. The first one is visas. Can you get a tourist visa to visit Russia, even from, say, the United States or a country that's considered to be an unfriendly nation, Russia? Yes, absolutely. People can do it. I've met people who've done it. So the visa thing's not a problem. The second problem is, how do you get here? Because most of the borders with Europe, both be they the land borders or flights, are canceled. So for the most part, if someone wants to fly into Moscow, they have to come from, say, Turkey or Dubai or China, or someone recently that I know actually came from India. Okay, so you have to kind of come from the global south to get here. All flights from Europe. I think Serbia has a flight, I was told by my one Serbian friend, but I don't quite know how that would work, because I don't even know if they'd allow the Serbian airplanes to fly here over the EU. So I'm kind of confused how that would work. But really, it's Turkey and India and Dubai are the ones that are sort of leading the way. Now, that's getting here. Now, with the money, literally, you just have to bring cash. And something that's important to note, you can bring as much cash into Russia as you want, but I think you can only take $10,000 worth out.
Dollars or euro? I mean, are there places to exchange dollars or euros?
Yeah, there still are,
okay.
But the exchange rate is not very favorable. The dollar really lost its value in connection with the special military operation. You know, when I was still worried about paying off my student loans there, what was it, in like the 70s to rubles to a dollar? And I think it's down to like 50 some now. So it's really taken a hit. And unfortunately, I have searched far and wide, asked a ton of people. I have found no simple solution. For example, I opened an account with Tinkoff Bank. Tinkoff Bank is they're not sanctioned at all. Can you send money to them? No. Basically, I even talked to them. I was like, why? You're not sanctioned. They said that the money goes along via SWIFT. It goes along some sort of path, and somewhere along that path, it'll hit a particular node, and that node says no to Russia. So Tinkoff is actually not sanctioned, and yet you can't send the money through any real normal means. Can you use Bitcoin? I finally jumped in the crypto game in connection with this whole special military operation. Opened a Binance account. Everyone said Binance is awesome. Blocked. Can't send anything to Russia. Even Binance, even crypto doesn't work. All the crypto does is it'll keep sending you around, trying to be like, send money to this, and then send money to here, and send your crypto to here, until you get stuck in this sort of evolving circle. A French friend of mine says he can do it. Something I haven't talked to him, which is bad, before this episode. Someone today just wrote me, a fan, that if you send money to a bank in Kazakhstan, especially VTB Bank, and you take the money, you convert it from dollars or whatever to rubles, you can send 10,000 rubles a day from Kazakhstan to Russia. 10,000 rubles is like $150. So you're not exactly going to move your life savings like that. So technically, if you are in a country that is not sanctioning Russia, and they have a ruble account system, okay? A ruble account, then they can send rubles to rubles in Russia via some more traditional means. If we want to get into this whole thing of using like a mirror card from China, I'm sorry. I only like to quote things that I've seen people actually do and accomplish. Although theoretically that's possible, I don't know anyone who's done it. So yeah, it's really hard to visit here now. You kind of have to bring cash.
Okay.
Sorry, I know. I was kind of hoping I could give you a really happy answer.
I
want people to come to Russia. I make a lot of tourist material and stuff, and it's like right now it's really difficult. But then again, maybe it's going to be like North Korea. If you really put in the effort, you can go there and film some crazy videos. It's like the only person there. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you for answering that question. A lot of people, that's actually a very common question that you would get about Russia. How do you get to Russia? How do you travel there and stuff like that? So I think you answered that very well. Alexander, any final thoughts? Any final
No, I mean, it's very interesting to get these insights about the situation in Russia because, of course, as I said at the beginning, it's the eye of the storm now. I mean, and we are in a storm. I mean, hundreds of missiles. And I've just been reading a piece just before we started our program about how the Russians supposedly had run out of missiles back in March. And they still
Back to March.
So, maybe one shouldn't laugh about such things, but I do get the feeling that things are going to start moving now very fast, and we're going to start seeing lots of things happen. There's an important meeting, as I said, at the Security Council today. We'll see what more decisions, if any, are made over the course of it. But I can't believe that that these people are meeting. Putin is meeting with all these people, and there won't be a decision of some kind. We may not know it immediately, but we will get a sense. So it's great to have Tim, who's there.
My pleasure. Anytime, guys.
Who's got his ear to the ground, who gets us a sense of how people feel, because of course wars are not just won by generals and presidents. They're won ultimately by people, by economies, by resources, by things like national morale, all those sort of things. So it's great to have Tim to bring us up to date about all of that and to give us the sense of where we are. And thanks, Tim. And it's been a pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you, Tim. It has been
thanks for having me.
It has been a pleasure to have you on this live stream, guys. I will have all of Tim's details, his YouTube channel, as well as his Telegram channel. I will have that in the description box and as a pinned comment down below. Thank you to everyone that was watching us, that has been watching us on theduran.locals.com, Rumble, Odyssey, and what else? Rumble, Odyssey, and Telegram is what we are on right now. That's what we are streaming on right now. And of course, YouTube as well. And what else do we have? Thank you to our moderators. Thank you, of course, to our awesome moderators. Valley S, Alan Watson. I think I also saw Reckless Abandon joining us to moderate as well. And thank you very, very much for helping us moderate this live stream. I don't think I left anyone out, did I? No, I think I got everybody. And to all the questions, thank you for the great questions. Me and Alexander will get to those in a dedicated stream that we will publish very, very soon. Mr. Tim Kirby coming to us from Moscow. Thank you very, very much, Tim. Alexander, thank you very, very much. Guys, have a great afternoon. Take care.